Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. It's an honor to be here, alhamdulillah, and thank you for organizing such an event. So I'll be sharing my personal journey within the field of Islam and science, some reflections and some insights on things which are related to what I've been working on, and then a general take on where I feel we are currently going. So prior to the studies at Cambridge Muslim College, I never really paid much attention to science as a subject related to Islam. If anything, I probably had a slight negative inclination towards science, especially coming from a academic background where there was a constant motive of undermining religion. It's not because I didn't like science, but I wouldn't have kind of considered it as part of an Islamic endeavor. It didn't help reading books that created this kind of dichotomy between Islam and science. I was thinking of the name of the author while I was coming on my travels here, and I couldn't recall the name. And then when Salima gave a presentation, Harun Yahya, and then it recalled, yes, this is a book that almost I think most Muslims at some point had in their household. But it shows the point that people are seeking, people are thirsty for knowledge, as one of your scholars said. So there's always been like a constant attempt to disprove scientific theories and facts, which, to be fair, at times were reasonable, but it resulted in a mindset having a negative connotation associated with science. I did have many questions regarding scientific inquiry, but didn't really always get answers I wanted, or at least not rational answers. But it wasn't at the point which really distressed me. So I guess in one sense I was like that old woman that Fakhruddin Razi speaks about in regards to having belief without attempting to rationalize it, in that kind of grey area that was spoken about earlier. Like the Quran said it and it was sufficient, or that was fine. However, times have changed, and now we're going through like a strange era where questions are being asked, scientific questions are being asked which need answering. However, the previous methods of asking local imams are no longer sufficient, not just because the lack of knowledge, but the questions require more thought behind them. And I have worked as part of for a number of mosques, and even one in Birmingham as well. And from my experience, people are leaving Islam because of this whole this issue with it was not necessarily evolution by itself, but just scientific questions and asking questions regarding things that, quite frankly, the imams don't have the answers to. So this is definitely an area that does need to be worked on. So I'll go back onto like my studies at Cambridge Muslim College and understanding science. But it was a very significant subject which provided a excess of answers to questions I had personally struggled with. During the lecture on evolution and its place in Islam, many challenging questions were raised and discussed. And although I didn't agree with everything, it certainly carved space for more expansive perspective on my part. It was a critical point of practice for me in terms of reasoning abilities and the absorption of new, albeit different ideas. However, for me, this was also a starting point that would further my inquiry into looking at science, but more from a traditional perspective. And this is what I started focusing on and spent quite some time. I began to appreciate the traditional understanding of science and the natural world and how it differs to the modern approach, and even to the modern Islamic approach. The changing criteria and the changing subjects. My recent engagement with science was during the summer. I was working with Dr. Shoaib Malik on a research paper that is yet to be published. My particular focus for this research project was to look at Islam and how Islam had engaged with science and its influence within the Western world. But then this led me to look at a more traditional aspect of Islam and science and how the engagement differed. I'm not going to focus too much on the research itself, but rather what it did for me. It really opened up a different but yet very important perspective on how enriched our tradition is within scientific thinking and with the scientific enterprise, and how important it is for us now to engage with this traditional literature, a tradition that provides us with a foundation that allows us to build on. From what I've experienced while studying in a somewhat traditional setting, the importance of being able to look at any field of study from a holistic framework, because this is how traditional studies were situated. It became very apparent that the scientific thinking within Islamic tradition has always been encouraged, stressing the systematic examination and the study of the word for both worldly and spiritual purposes, allowing one to actively engage with nature in pursuit of the truth, and working towards that Islamic worldview. Aside from the course, I spent a lot of time focusing on science from a traditional perspective, and that's where I am now. There's a big difference on how we do science and how traditionally science was studied. I'm actually currently doing my dissertation on a recently discovered scientific concept and its relationship within the traditional framework, using the works of Islamic scholars, traditional Islamic scholars. And then there's while working on this current project, it allowed me to look at the differences. And so I feel from an Islamic perspective, the problem is that we're not engaging with the, or should I say, from an Islamic perspective, we're not engaging with the natural scientific world as we used to, and that's why we have created gaps. Before, the traditional scholars knew the natural world and discussions of their field. Before, it was part of their education system, and part of the natural philosophy that they taught. But now, when Islamic scholars try to engage, they don't engage with scientific aspects as scientists. So rather, they ask questions like with a jurist mentality, and so when they look at the aspects, they were like, what is right, what is wrong, what is halal, what is haram, as opposed to try to find answers or find out present their own ideas and answers. The engagement with science is no longer it's no longer traditional, because traditional scholars would use their own understanding of the natural world and then give questions or give answers based on their understanding. But now we have a kind of apologetic mindset that this is right, this is wrong, or this doesn't contradict Islam. So we're always kind of one step back. So the main question that traditionally was to know this is true or this is false. There was a clear cut right or wrong, which is something that we need to work on. And this is why I think one of the main differences that it's the traditional epistemology with which we would be able to manage or be able to argue to understand the world and engage in is very different to how the current science community's epistemology works. The traditional scholars had placed a big role for the human intellect to reason and reach conclusions about the natural world. Sorry?
Turn it 1 more minute.
I'm finished. And whereas the science community, the traditional scholars placed a big role for the human intellect to reason and reach conclusions about the natural world. The science community has now somewhat removed that aspect, and that's the reason why science does not accept philosophy as part of the science. But by removing philosophy, which teaches one how to make arguments from science, is the very reason why I believe now the science community cannot engage with philosophy. So it's not very much solely based on the observation of the natural world. I'll leave it there, inshallah.